millionaire CEO's ex-wife, called him gay in church. The whole congregation laughed, but he handled it with so much pride. Sunday morning at Grace Community Church should have been peaceful. He sat in the third pew with his wife, her hand resting gently on her still-hidden baby bump. Both of them focused on the sermon about forgiveness and grace. That's when his pastor walked through the church doors.
Well, if it isn't Caspian Vale. Tell me, everyone, how does it feel to worship next to a man who couldn't even satisfy his own wife?
A man who's probably more interested in the choir boys than his new little bride. The congregation gasped. Nervous laughter rippled through the pews. All eyes turned to the millionaire CEO who'd just been publicly humiliated in the house of God. But what happened next would show everyone the true measure of a man's character. Morgana, you're welcome to stay for service. Pastor Shepard's message on forgiveness might be exactly what you need to hear. His voice was calm, dignified, without a trace of anger or shame. This is the story of how grace under fire can transform a moment of intended humiliation into a lesson in true strength. Have you ever had to maintain your dignity when someone tried to destroy your reputation in public? Have you ever watched someone choose grace over revenge when they had every right to fight back? Tonight, we're exploring a story about what happens when true character meets bitter jealousy, and how the way we handle our worst moments can become our greatest triumphs. Let's dive straight into the story. The alarm clock read 6:30 a.m. when Caspian Vale's eyes opened, but he'd been awake for several minutes already, listening to the gentle breathing of his wife beside him. Serafina lay curled against his side, her auburn hair spilled across the pillow like silk, one hand instinctively protective over her still flat belly where their first child grew in secret. 12 weeks. They'd kept the news to themselves, savoring the private joy while waiting for the safer second trimester to share their happiness with the world. At 35, Caspian had never thought he'd experience this kind of contentment, the deep peace that came from loving someone who loved him back completely, without agenda or condition. "Good morning, my love," Serafina murmured against his chest, her voice soft with sleep. "Ready for church?" "Always ready when I'm going with you." She lifted her head to smile at him, her green eyes bright with the secret joy they shared. Pastor Shepard speaking on forgiveness today. Should be a powerful message. Forgiveness, Caspian repeated thoughtfully. Something I'm still learning, even after all these years. You've come so far, Caspian. The man I married is nothing like the angry, bitter person you described from 5 years ago. That's because you saved me, Sarah. You and finding faith. You gave me reasons to become better. She kissed his jaw softly. You saved yourself. I just loved you while you did it. Their morning routine was one of Caspian's favorite parts of the week. No board meetings, no urgent calls from Vale Industries, no pressure to be the shrewd businessman who'd built a tech empire from nothing. Just him and Serafina, making breakfast together, reading scripture, preparing their hearts for worship. "How are you feeling today?" he asked as she sipped ginger tea instead of her usual coffee. "Good. The morning sickness is getting better. Dr. Martinez said that's normal around 12 weeks. And you're sure you're not ready to tell people yet?" "Soon," she promised. "Maybe after next week's appointment. I just want to be completely certain everything's progressing normally." Caspian understood her caution. At 32, Serafina had waited a long time for love and family. They both wanted to protect this precious gift until they were sure it was safe to celebrate publicly. "Whatever makes you comfortable. I just can't wait to shout it from the rooftops that I'm going to be a father. You're going to be an amazing father." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're an amazing husband. Because you're patient and kind and you've learned to put love before pride." They dressed carefully for church, Caspian in a navy suit that he'd had tailored to perfection, Serafina in a flowing dress that accommodated her still subtle changes without revealing them. She was a picture of grace and elegance, her natural beauty enhanced by the inner glow that seemed to radiate from truly happy women. "Ready to go worship?" she asked, taking his arm as they walked to his Mercedes. Ready to worship, ready to learn, ready to grow. The drive to Grace Community Church took them through the upscale neighborhood where they'd built their life together. It was a far cry from the penthouse bachelor pad where Caspian had lived during his first marriage, cold, expensive, and ultimately empty. This home was warm, filled with Serafina's artwork and laughter, plants that she nurtured with the same care she brought to everything she loved. "I've been thinking about the nursery," she said as they drove. "The spare room with the morning light. It would be perfect. Yellow walls. Since we're waiting to find out the gender? Soft yellow with white trim. Classic, peaceful, full of possibility. Like our life together. Exactly like our life together." Grace Community Church sat on a tree-lined street, its traditional architecture speaking to permanence and faith that weathered storms. Caspian had found this church 2 years ago, shortly after meeting Serafina, when he'd decided that wealth and success meant nothing without spiritual foundation. Pastor Elias Shepherd had been patient with Caspian's questions, his anger at God for the pain in his past, his struggle to understand forgiveness when he'd been so deeply hurt by someone he'd trusted. Slowly, with Serafina's love and the pastor's guidance, Caspian had found peace. "There's the Hendersons," Serafina observed as they walked toward the entrance. "And the young couple with the new baby, what were their names?" "Marcus and Jennifer Chun. Baby David is 8 weeks old now." "You remember everyone's details. That's what makes you such a good leader." "I remember because I care. This community matters to me." They found their usual pew, third from the front, close enough to focus on the message, but not so close as to feel ostentatious. Caspian had learned humility the hard way, and he tried to practice it in all areas of his life now. "Good morning, Caspian, Serafina." Mrs. Patterson, the church pianist, greeted them warmly. "How are you two doing?" "Blessed beyond measure," Serafina replied with a smile that made Caspian's chest tight with love. "That's wonderful to hear. The love you two share is an inspiration to all of us." As the service began, Caspian felt the familiar peace that came with gathering to worship. The choir's voices lifted in harmony. The congregation joined in hymns that spoke of grace and redemption, and Pastor Shepherd prepared to deliver his message on forgiveness. "Beloved," Pastor Shepherd began, "today we're going to explore what it means to forgive those who have wounded us deeply. Not because they deserve it, but because we deserve the freedom that forgiveness brings." Caspian squeezed Serafina's hand gently, both of them thinking of their own journey toward forgiving the people who had hurt them in the past. For him, that meant finding peace with Morgana, the ex-wife whose betrayal had nearly destroyed his faith in love itself. "True forgiveness," the pastor continued, "doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. It means releasing our right to revenge and choosing to respond with grace, even when grace seems impossible." That's when the church doors opened with more force than necessary, drawing every eye in the congregation. A woman in an expensive red dress strode down the center aisle, her heels clicking against the wooden floor with military precision. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but her expression was twisted with something ugly and vindictive. Caspian's blood turned to ice. Morgana Blackthorne, his ex-wife, had just walked into his sanctuary. The confrontation Morgana surveyed the congregation like a predator sizing up prey, her cold blue eyes scanning the pews until they landed on Caspian and Serafina. A smile spread across her face, not warm or joyful, but calculating and cruel. Well, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent church. "If it isn't Caspian Vale, the millionaire CEO himself. How nice to see you in church, darling. Trying to buy your way into heaven now." Pastor Shepherd stepped forward from the pulpit. "Ma'am, you're welcome to join our service, but I ask that you please take a seat so we can continue worship." "Oh, I'm not here to worship," Morgana laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "I'm here to give this congregation some truth about the man they're sitting next to." Caspian felt Serafina's hand tighten in his, but he remained perfectly still, his expression calm despite the storm raging in his chest. He'd known this day might come eventually. Morgana had never been able to let go of anything, especially not him. "Tell me, everyone," Morgana continued, turning to address the congregation like she was giving a performance. "How does it feel to worship next to a man who couldn't even satisfy his own wife? A man who's probably more interested in the choir boys than his new little bride." Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Children turned to their parents with confused expressions. Adults shifted uncomfortably, some laughing nervously, others looking horrified at the disruption of their sacred space. Morgana. Caspian's voice was quiet but carried clearly through the church. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and dignified. You're welcome to stay for service. Pastor Shepard's message on forgiveness might be exactly what you need to hear. The silence that followed was profound. Every person in that congregation held their breath, waiting to see how this impossible situation would unfold. Forgiveness. Morgana's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Why would I need forgiveness? I'm not the one living a lie. I'm not the one pretending to be something I'm not. What exactly do you think I'm pretending to be? Caspian asked, his tone still calm, still dignified. A real man. A man who can actually satisfy a woman instead of making her feel like she's married to her gay best friend. More gasps, more uncomfortable shifting. Some people actually laughed, nervous and unsure, but still laughing at the spectacle unfolding before them. Serafina started to stand, her protective instincts flaring, but Caspian gently placed a hand on her arm. Sarah, it's all right. He turned back to Morgana, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who knew exactly who he was. Morgana, I'm sorry you're in so much pain that you felt the need to come here and try to hurt me. I'm sorry that our marriage failed, and I'm sorry for whatever I did that contributed to that failure. You didn't do anything, she snapped. That was the problem. You were cold, distant, more interested in your business than in being a real husband. You're right. I was those things. I failed you as a husband, and I take responsibility for that. But your accusations about my sexuality. He paused, looking around the congregation with steady eyes. They say more about your pain than they do about my truth. So you admit it. Morgana's voice rose triumphantly. You admit I admit that I failed as a husband because I didn't know how to love properly. I admit that I was so focused on building wealth that I forgot to build a marriage. I admit that I was emotionally unavailable and probably made you feel unloved and unwanted. His voice never wavered, never showed anger or defensiveness. But Morgana, I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. God and love have taught me what it means to be a real husband, a real man. And I pray that someday you'll find the healing you need to move forward. Healing. She looked around the congregation wildly. I don't need healing. I need people to know the truth about who they're worshiping with. That's when Serafina stood. She moved with the grace that had first captured Caspian's heart, her voice gentle but clear as she addressed Morgana directly. I'm Serafina Vale, she said simply, Caspian's wife. And I want you to know that your accusations don't change anything about who I know my husband to be. Your husband. Morgana's eyes narrowed as she really looked at Serafina for the first time. How long have you been married to my sloppy seconds? 2 years. 2 of the most beautiful years of my life. Then you don't know him like I do. You don't know what it's like to be married to a man who can't. I know what it's like to be married to a man who loves me completely, Serafina interrupted gently. I know what it's like to be cherished, protected, and valued. I know what it's like to be with someone who puts our relationship above everything else, including his business. That's impossible. Caspian doesn't know how to love anyone but himself. The Caspian you knew may not have. But people can change, Morgana. People can grow and heal and become better versions of themselves. Pastor Shepard had been watching this exchange with the wisdom of someone who'd counseled many broken hearts. Now he stepped forward again. Perhaps we should all take a moment to pray, he suggested gently. It seems like there's a lot of pain in this room that needs God's healing touch. I don't need prayer. Morgana's composure was cracking. I need people to stop pretending this man is something he's not. And what exactly do you think I am? Caspian asked again, his patience apparently infinite. You're a cold, selfish man who destroyed our marriage and then waltzed off to play house with someone young and naive enough to believe your lies. You're right about one thing, Caspian said quietly. I was cold and selfish during our marriage. I destroyed us through my emotional unavailability and my inability to prioritize love over ambition. But Morgana, I've spent 5 years learning to be better. 5 years in therapy, in prayer, in self-reflection. He gestured toward Serafina. This woman didn't fall for lies. She fell in love with the man I've worked to become, a man who knows that success means nothing without love, that wealth means nothing without purpose, that being a husband means putting your wife's happiness above your own ego. Pretty words, Morgana snarled. But I lived with you for 3 years. I know the truth. The truth is that I failed you. The truth is that I wasn't ready for marriage when we married. The truth is that I let ambition and fear make me into someone who couldn't love properly. His voice remained steady, compassionate even. But the truth is also that people can change. The truth is that God can heal broken hearts and transform lives. The truth is that your pain doesn't have to define the rest of your story. The congregation sat in stunned silence, watching this masterclass in grace under fire. Here was a man who'd been publicly humiliated, falsely accused, and deliberately attacked in his place of worship, and he was responding with dignity, honesty, and even compassion for his attacker. The aftermath, the silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, slowly, people began to shift in their seats. Not away from Caspian and Serafina, but toward them. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly pianist, stood up from her pew. "Caspian Vale," she said in her clear, strong voice. "I've watched you in this congregation for 2 years. I've seen how you treat your wife, how you serve our community, how you've grown in faith and character. Whatever happened in your past marriage, the man we know today is a man of integrity." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Caspian replied, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus Chun, the young father, stood next. "When our baby was in the NICU, you and Serafina brought meals to our family for 2 weeks. You didn't have to do that. You did it because you care about people." One by one, members of the congregation began to stand, creating a wall of support around the couple who'd been attacked. But Caspian raised his hand gently. "Please, everyone sit. This isn't about defending me. This is about showing love to someone who's clearly in pain." He turned back to Morgana, who was looking increasingly lost and desperate as her planned humiliation backfired completely. "Morgana, I want you to know that I forgive you for this. I forgive you for the affairs during our marriage. I forgive you for the lies you told during our divorce. And I forgive you for coming here today to try to hurt me. I don't want your forgiveness. I know. But I'm giving it anyway, because holding on to anger was poisoning my life. Forgiveness isn't for you, it's for me. It's for my peace, my marriage, my future." Morgana looked around the congregation, seeing the faces of people who clearly loved and respected the man she tried to destroy. Her plan had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "It is over," Caspian replied gently. "It's been over for 5 years. I hope you can find peace with that." Pastor Shepard approached them both. "Morgana, you're welcome to stay for the rest of our service. Our church believes in redemption and healing for everyone." "I don't need your pity," she snapped, but tears were starting to form in her eyes. "It's not pity," Serafina said softly. "It's love. The same love that helped my husband become the man he is today. The same love that's available to anyone who wants to heal and grow." Morgana stared at Serafina for a long moment, taking in her gentle strength, her obvious happiness, the way she stood beside her husband not as his defender, but as his equal partner. "You really love him," she said, and for the first time, her voice held wonder instead of venom. "I love him completely. Not because he's perfect, but because he's real. Because he's worked to become the kind of man worthy of love. He never looked at me the way he looks at you. Maybe because you both were different people then. Maybe because you both needed to grow before you could love properly." Morgana's shoulders sagged as the fight went out of her. "I've been so angry for so long. I don't even remember how to be anything else. Anger is just pain with nowhere to go," Pastor Shepard said gently. "But pain can heal if you let it. I don't know how." "Start with forgiveness," Caspian suggested. "Not of me, of yourself. For the choices you made, for the hurt you've caused, for the years you've wasted in bitterness. Have you ever watched someone destroy themselves with bitterness while someone else chose grace? The contrast is powerful. If this story is resonating with you, show some love with a like, and tell me in the comments about a time you chose dignity over revenge." Morgana looked at him for a long moment, then at Serafina, then at the congregation that had rallied around the couple she tried to destroy. "I should go," she said quietly. "You should stay," Serafina replied. "If you want to. Sometimes healing starts with hearing truth spoken in love. I've forgotten what truth sounds like." "Then stay and remember." After another long pause, Morgana moved to an empty pew in the back of the church. She didn't participate in the service, but she didn't leave either. She sat in silence as Pastor Shepherd continued his message about forgiveness, about how grace could transform even the hardest hearts. As the service concluded, Caspian and Serafina were surrounded by church members offering support and admiration for how they'd handled the situation. "That was extraordinary, son," said Mr. Henderson, a retired minister. "I've never seen anyone respond to an attack with such grace." "Thank you, sir, but I can't take credit. 5 years ago, I would have responded very differently." "What changed?" asked Jennifer Chun. Caspian looked at his wife, then at the cross hanging behind the altar, then back at the woman who'd asked the question. "I learned that being a real man isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about character, integrity, and choosing love over pride. I learned that strength isn't shown in how hard you can fight back. It's shown in how gracefully you can handle being attacked." "And you learned that from your faith?" "From my faith, from my wife, from making mistakes and choosing to grow from them instead of being destroyed by them." As they walked to their car after the service, Serafina slipped her arm through his. "I'm so proud of you," she said quietly. "The way you handled that was beautiful. I had a good teacher in grace. Your pastor, you've shown me every day what it looks like to respond to difficulty with love instead of defensiveness." "Caspian, there's something I want to tell you." "What's that?" "Watching you today, seeing your character under pressure, seeing how you chose compassion over revenge, it made me realize something." "What?" "Our child is going to have the most incredible father. Not because you're wealthy or successful, but because you're a man of character who knows how to love well." "Sarah, I'm ready to tell people about the baby. I'm ready to share our joy with the world." Caspian stopped walking and turned to face her. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Today showed me that we're ready for anything as long as we face it together. Even if Morgana tries to cause more trouble. Especially then. Because I saw today that love really does conquer all, not by fighting, but by being so strong and so genuine that hatred can't stand against it." As they drove home, Caspian reflected on the morning's events. What had started as Morgana's attempt to destroy him had become a powerful testimony to the transformation that was possible when someone chose growth over bitterness, love over revenge. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Serafina asked. "Morgana, I mean. I hope so. I really do. Everyone deserves the chance to heal and start over. Even someone who tried to publicly humiliate you, especially someone that broken. Hurt people, but love people. Maybe seeing what's possible will help her want something better for herself. I love you, Caspian Vale. I love you too, Serafina Vale. You and our little miracle." That afternoon, as they prepared for their Sunday rest, Caspian found himself thinking about the man he'd been 5 years ago, angry, defensive, proud, broken by betrayal, and determined never to be vulnerable again. That man would have responded to Morgana's attack with legal threats, public retaliation, and wounded ego. This man, the man he'd chosen to become through faith, therapy, and love, had responded with grace. And in doing so, he'd not only preserved his own dignity, but offered hope to everyone who witnessed it that transformation was possible, that character could triumph over circumstances, that love really could win. Tomorrow, he and Serafina would begin sharing the news of their pregnancy. They would build their family on the foundation of mutual respect, spiritual growth, and unconditional love that had helped them weather today's storm. But tonight, they would rest in the peace that came from knowing they'd handled their test with honor, and that their love was strong enough to handle whatever challenges the future might bring. Monday morning arrived with the gentle autumn sunshine that had always been Serafina's favorite kind of light. She stood at the kitchen window, watching Caspian in the garden as he carefully tended to the roses they'd planted together last spring. Even in his business suit, he moved with the patience and gentleness that had drawn her to him from their very first meeting. "You're going to be late for your board meeting," she called through the open window. "Let them wait," he replied, not looking up from the rosebush he was pruning. "These roses need attention, and after yesterday, I'm reminded that some things are more important than boardrooms. The roses will still be here tonight. So will the board. But this moment, this peace, this morning light on your face, this won't come again." Serafina smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly where their secret grew stronger each day. "Come inside, my romantic husband. Vale Industries needs its CEO, and your roses need you to make money to pay for their fertilizer." He laughed, the sound carrying across their garden like music. "Fine, but tonight, I'm taking you to dinner somewhere beautiful, and we're going to talk about cribs and baby names and all the dreams we're building." "Deal. But Caspian." "Yes. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, about how you handled Morgana." He straightened, setting down his pruning shears and giving her his full attention. "What about it? I keep thinking about how different you are from the man she described, how much you've grown and changed. It makes me curious about who you were before and what happened between you two that hurt you both so deeply." Caspian was quiet for a long moment, then walked to the window where she stood. Through the glass, he reached up to touch her face gently. "It's not a pretty story, love. I wasn't a good husband to her. Not because of anything she accused me of yesterday, but because I didn't know how to love anyone, including myself." "Will you tell me?" "All of it. I know pieces from what you've shared, but after yesterday, I think I need to understand the whole truth." "Are you sure? It might change how you see me." "Caspian Vale, I've seen you handle public humiliation with grace. I've watched you choose compassion over revenge. I've lived with you for 2 years and watched you grow in faith and character every single day. Nothing about your past could change how I see your heart." He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "All right, tonight, over dinner, I'll tell you everything. The whole story of who I was, what I did wrong, and how God used even my failures to bring me to you. I love you. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." As Caspian drove to his office that morning, his mind drifted back to the early days of his marriage to Morgana. It felt like remembering someone else's life, a story about a man who shared his name but not his heart. 5.5 years earlier, Caspian Vale had been 29 and utterly convinced that love was a luxury successful men couldn't afford. Vale Industries was growing rapidly, transforming from a small tech startup into a major player in the renewable energy sector. He worked 18-hour days, slept in his office more often than his penthouse, and measured his worth entirely by quarterly profits and market share. Morgana Blackthorne had been everything that made sense for a man in his position: beautiful, sophisticated, from a wealthy family with connections that could benefit his business. She understood the demands of corporate life because she'd grown up in that world. She expected expensive gifts, lavish vacations, and the status that came with being married to a rising star in the business world. Their courtship had been more like a merger than a romance. They looked perfect together at charity galas and business dinners. She had the social graces to be a CEO's wife, and he had the ambition and drive she found attractive in men. When he proposed, it was with a 5-carat diamond and a calculation that marriage would stabilize his image and provide him with a suitable partner for the life he was building. The wedding had cost more than most people's houses: 300 guests, a designer dress, flowers flown in from Ecuador, and coverage in society magazines. Morgana had been radiant, playing the role of blushing bride with practiced perfection. Caspian had been distracted, fielding calls from investors even during the reception. "Can't the business wait one day?" Morgana had asked as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. "The renewable energy sector doesn't take breaks, darling. If we don't strike while the market is hot, someone else will. What about our honeymoon? Will you be working during that too?" "Just a few calls. A few meetings with the European investors. It'll be fine." It wasn't fine. Nothing about their marriage was fine, though it took them both 3 years to admit it. Caspian had thrown himself even deeper into work after the wedding, as if having a wife meant he could now pursue success with even greater intensity. Morgana had thrown herself into shopping, decorating their penthouse, and maintaining the social calendar that befitted their status. They lived like roommates who happened to share a last name and a bed. Conversations were about schedules, social obligations, and logistics. Intimacy became increasingly rare and mechanical. Caspian worked late to avoid going home to a wife who felt like a stranger. Morgana spent money and filled her days with activities that had nothing to do with building a real relationship. "We never talk anymore," she'd complained during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "When you're home, you're either on your phone or on your computer. When was the last time we had dinner together without you checking emails?" I'm building something important, Morgana. This company is going to change the world. What about changing our marriage? What about building something important here in our home? Marriage isn't a business I can manage. It's supposed to just work. Nothing just works. Relationships require attention, effort, investment. I invest in things that give me returns. This marriage was supposed to make my life easier, not more complicated. The words had hung between them like a death sentence. Caspian had essentially told his wife that he'd married her for convenience, not love. Morgana had stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Make your life easier. That's what I'm for. Not love, not partnership, not building a life together, just making things easier for the great Caspian Vale. Morgana, that's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. And you know what? You're right. I did marry you to make my life easier too. Your money, your status, your connections, I thought that would be enough. And it's not. It's not. I want to be loved, Caspian. I want to matter to someone more than their business does. I want to be seen as a person, not an accessory. I do see you. No, you don't. You see the woman who manages your social calendar and looks good on your arm at business dinners. You have no idea who I really am, what I want, what I dream about. She was right, and they both knew it. But instead of using that moment to try to build something real, they both retreated further into their separate lives. Morgana began having lunch with Richard Caldwell, a divorced investor who paid attention to her thoughts and opinions. Caspian noticed, but told himself he was too busy to care. The affairs, yes, affairs, plural, had started 6 months later. First with Richard, then with Marcus Webb, a younger man who made her feel beautiful and desired. Morgana wasn't particularly discreet, and Caspian wasn't particularly surprised when he found out. "Do you even care?" she'd asked when he confronted her with evidence of her infidelity. "Should I? We both know this marriage isn't real. It could have been real. If you'd ever tried to love me." "I don't know how to love anyone, Morgana. I thought you understood that." "I understood it. I just thought marriage might change you. I thought having someone who belonged to you might make you want to learn. Belonging isn't the same as loving. No, it's not. And neither is marriage." The divorce had been brutal, not because there was love to fight over, but because there was so much anger and hurt to distribute. Morgana had tried to take half of everything, claiming she'd supported his career through their marriage. Caspian had fought her with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to business, determined not to be taken advantage of. The final court date had been the worst day of Caspian's life up to that point. Morgana's lawyer had painted him as a cold, unfeeling man who'd used his wife for social advancement and then discarded her when he no longer needed her services. His lawyer had painted her as a gold digger who'd married for money and then cheated when she felt entitled to more than she was getting. Both portrayals had been partially true and completely devastating. In the matter of Blackthorn versus Vale, the judge had announced, "The court finds that both parties entered into this marriage with unrealistic expectations and failed to build the foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection necessary for a successful union." Morgana had gotten a substantial settlement, not the half she'd wanted, but enough to maintain her lifestyle for several years if she was careful. Caspian had kept the majority of his business assets, but lost any faith he'd ever had in love, marriage, or his ability to make anyone happy. The last words they'd spoken to each other before yesterday had been outside that courthouse 5 years ago. "I hope you're happy," Morgana had said, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "I hope your precious company keeps you warm at night. I hope you find someone who can give you what you're looking for," he'd replied, and he'd meant it, despite everything. "What I was looking for was you, Caspian. The real you, not the businessman. But I don't think that person exists anymore. Maybe he never did. Maybe not. But I thought I saw glimpses of him sometimes. I thought if I waited long enough, tried hard enough, he might come out. I'm sorry I couldn't be that man for you. I'm sorry too." Morgana's current struggles while Caspian had spent the years after their divorce in therapy, finding faith, and learning to become a better man, Morgana had spiraled in the opposite direction. The settlement money had seemed like a fortune at first, but her lifestyle had always been expensive, and without the discipline of a budget or the income of a husband, it had disappeared faster than she'd expected. The apartment she'd rented after leaving their penthouse was nice, but not luxurious. The car she'd bought was elegant, but not the latest model. The clothes, the vacations, the spa treatments that had once been automatic became careful choices, then occasional treats, then distant memories. But more than the financial struggles, it was the loneliness that had eaten away at her. She'd thought the money would attract new suitors, men who would want to wine and dine the beautiful ex-wife of a tech mogul. Instead, she'd found men who saw her as a temporary diversion, a cautionary tale, or a woman with too much baggage to be worth serious consideration. Richard Caldwell, the investor she'd had an affair with, had disappeared from her life the moment her divorce was finalized. Marcus Webb, the younger man who'd made her feel desired, had moved on to a woman closer to his own age with fewer complications. The friends she'd cultivated during her marriage, other wealthy wives who'd included her in their social circle, had gradually stopped calling as it became clear she was no longer part of their world. The problem with marrying for money, her therapist had told her during one of the few sessions she'd attended, is that when the money goes away, there's nothing left to build on. I didn't just marry for money, Morgana had protested. I thought I loved him. Did you? Or did you love the idea of him? The status, the security, the life he could provide? I don't know anymore. Maybe both. Maybe neither. What did you know about Caspian as a person? His fears, his dreams, his vulnerabilities? Morgana had sat in silence for a long time, realizing she couldn't answer the question. She'd known his schedule, his business goals, his social obligations. She'd known he liked his coffee black, his steaks medium rare, and his shirts pressed with military precision. But his heart? His inner life? The man beneath the CEO facade? She'd known almost nothing. The therapy had been too painful, too confrontational with truths she wasn't ready to face. She'd stopped going after 6 sessions, telling herself that the therapist didn't understand her situation, that her problems were financial, not emotional. For the past 2 years, she'd been living in a modest 1-bedroom apartment, working part-time at an art gallery owned by a family friend who'd taken pity on her. The work was interesting enough. She'd always had good taste in art, but the pay was a fraction of what she'd once spent on a single shopping trip. She'd watched Caspian's continued success from afar, following Vail Industries in the business news, seeing photos of him at charity events and industry conferences. He looked different in the pictures, more relaxed, more genuinely happy than she remembered him being during their marriage. Then, 6 months ago, she'd seen the wedding announcement in the society pages. Caspian Vail and Serafina Morrison, married in an intimate ceremony at Grace Community Church. The photo had shown a couple looking at each other with obvious love and joy, surrounded by a small group of friends and family. The woman, Serafina, was beautiful in a natural, unforced way that was completely different from Morgana's own carefully maintained elegance. She was younger, yes, but not dramatically so. More importantly, she looked at Caspian like he was her whole world, and he looked at her the same way. Morgana had stared at that photo for hours, studying their faces, their body language, the obvious intimacy between them. This was how people in love looked at each other. This was what she'd wanted with Caspian and never achieved. The jealousy had been immediate and consuming. Not just jealousy of the woman who'd won his heart, but jealousy of Caspian himself, for finding happiness, for growing into the kind of man who could inspire that kind of love, for moving on so completely while she remained stuck in the bitterness of their failed marriage. She'd started driving by Grace Community Church on Sundays, telling herself she was just curious about where they worshipped. She'd seen them arrive together, holding hands, looking peaceful and content in a way that made her chest tight with envy. It should have been me, she'd whispered to herself, sitting in her car across the street from their happiness. If he'd tried harder, if he'd learned to love properly sooner, it could have been me. But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't true. The man she'd been married to couldn't have loved anyone the way Caspian clearly loved Serafina. And the woman she'd been during their marriage, bitter, demanding, focused on status and material things, couldn't have inspired the kind of devotion she saw in their interactions. They both needed to grow, to change, to become better versions of themselves. The difference was that Caspian had done the work, and she had spent 5 years trapped in resentment. The decision to confront him had come suddenly, fueled by a particularly bad week where her car had broken down, her rent had been raised, and she'd seen another photo of the happy couple at a charity gala. She'd convinced herself that exposing his true nature would somehow make her feel better, would prove that his happiness was built on lies. Instead, she'd walked into a church full of people who clearly loved and respected him, watched him respond to her attack with grace and dignity, and realized that the man she'd tried to destroy was genuinely worthy of the love he'd found. The humiliation of her plan backfiring had been immediate and complete. But worse than the embarrassment was the dawning realization that her 5 years of bitterness had accomplished nothing except making her into someone she didn't recognize or like. The pregnancy reveal that evening, Caspian kept his promise to take Serafina to dinner somewhere beautiful. He'd chosen Bella Vista, an intimate Italian restaurant with a terrace overlooking the city lights. They sat at a corner table surrounded by climbing roses and soft candlelight, the perfect setting for the conversation they'd been building toward all day. "You've been quiet since we got here," Serafina observed, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "Are you nervous about telling me your story?" "Not nervous, exactly. More like preparing myself to see how you look at me when you know everything." "Caspian, I already know the most important thing about your story." "What's that?" "How it ends. It ends with you choosing love, choosing growth, choosing to become the kind of man who could handle what happened yesterday with such grace." He lifted their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "All right. The whole truth, then." For the next hour, over wine for him and sparkling cider for her, Caspian told his wife everything. His marriage to Morgana, his emotional unavailability, the affairs, the bitter divorce, the years of therapy and spiritual searching that had led him to faith and, eventually, to her. "I was angry for so long," he said as he finished the story. "Angry at her for cheating, angry at myself for failing, angry at God for letting me make such a mess of something that was supposed to be beautiful." "What changed?" Pastor Shepard asked me a question that stopped me cold. He said, "Caspian, do you want to be right, or do you want to be healed?" I'd been so focused on proving that I was the wrong party, on making sure everyone knew I was the victim in the situation, that I'd forgotten to actually work on becoming better. "So you chose healing." "I chose to stop being a victim of my past and start being the architect of my future. I chose to learn how to love properly, how to be vulnerable, how to put another person's happiness before my own ego." Serafina was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd shared. "Thank you for telling me. All of it. Does it change anything? Knowing how badly I failed before." "It changes everything," she said, and his heart clenched until she continued. "It makes me love you more. Because now I understand the work you did to become the man I fell in love with. Now I know that your character wasn't just natural talent. It was a choice you made every day to be better, Sarah, and it makes me more confident than ever that you're going to be an amazing father." "Why?" "Because you've proven that you can learn from mistakes, that you can grow and change, that you can choose love over pride." She paused, her hand moving to her belly. "Speaking of which, I think it's time." "Time for what?" "Time to tell people about our baby. Starting with our church family tomorrow night at Bible study." Caspian's face lit up with joy. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Watching you yesterday, seeing how our community rallied around us, seeing the love and respect people have for you, I want to share our happiness with them. I want them to celebrate with us." "What about the timing?" "After what happened with Morgana." "Especially after what happened with Morgana. She tried to paint you as someone incapable of real love, real intimacy, real partnership. What better way to show the truth than to share the news that we're building a family together?" They drove home hand in hand, hearts full of anticipation for the joy they would soon share with their community. Neither of them noticed the car parked across the street from the restaurant, or the woman inside it who had watched their intimate dinner with growing realization about what their happiness meant. Wednesday evening's Bible study at Grace Community Church was a weekly gathering of about 30 church members who met to study Scripture and share their lives with each other. Caspian and Serafina had been regular attendees since joining the church, and this group had become like extended family to them. "Before we begin tonight's study," Pastor Shepard announced as the group settled into the church's fellowship hall, "Caspian and Serafina have something they'd like to share with us." Caspian stood, his arm around his wife's shoulders, his face glowing with happiness. "Most of you were here Sunday when we had an unexpected visitor who tried to disrupt our worship. Murmurs of agreement and support rippled through the group. What you witnessed that day was our community choosing love over judgment, grace over gossip, unity over division. You showed us what it means to be the body of Christ. And because you're our family, Serafina continued, we want you to be the first to know our joyful news. She moved her cardigan aside, revealing the subtle but unmistakable curve of her growing belly. We're having a baby. The room erupted in celebration. Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands in delight. Marcus and Jennifer Chun, still navigating new parenthood themselves, beamed with excitement. The older couples who had prayed for Caspian and Serafina's marriage surrounded them with congratulations and offers of help. How far along? Asked Rebecca Martinez, the church's children's ministry leader. 14 weeks, Serafina replied, her hand resting protectively over their child. Due in early May. May babies are the best babies, declared George Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's husband. Our oldest grandson was born in May, sweetest temperament you ever saw. Do you know what you're having? Asked another member. Not yet, Caspian replied. We're waiting to find out. But honestly, as long as the baby is healthy, we couldn't be happier. Boy or girl, this child is going to be so loved, said Jennifer Chun. You two are going to be wonderful parents. We're going to need all the advice we can get, Serafina admitted. This is new territory for both of us. That's what community is for, Pastor Shepard said warmly. None of us raise children alone. We do it together, supporting each other, sharing wisdom, helping carry the load. As the evening progressed, the Bible study became an impromptu celebration. Stories were shared about pregnancies and babies, advice was offered about everything from cribs to college funds, and prayers were said for the health and safety of mother and child. I have a confession, said Martha Stevens, one of the older women in the group. Sunday, when that woman tried to attack your character, Caspian, my first thought was, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But my second thought was, I can't wait for him and Serafina to have children, because they're going to raise them with such love and faith. You could see this coming. Serafina asked with a laugh. Honey, the way you two look at each other, the way you care for everyone in this church, the way you've built your marriage on faith and service, it was obvious you were meant to be parents. This is what real strength looks like, responding to hatred with love, to cruelty with kindness. If this transformation is touching your heart, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to remember that grace always wins. As they drove home that night, Serafina reflected on the difference between this celebration and what her announcement might have been like in her previous social circles. Remember the dinner parties we used to go to? She asked Caspian. Where people competed over everything, who had the most expensive wine, the latest designer dress, the most exotic vacation plans. I remember feeling exhausted by all of it. If we'd announced a pregnancy in that crowd, it would have been about comparing strollers and private schools and baby designers. Tonight was about love and community and faith. Which kind of environment do you want our child to grow up in? This one. Definitely this one. Where people care more about your character than your bank account. Good thing, because your character is extraordinary. Our character. We're building this together. What they didn't know was that their celebration had been witnessed by someone who needed to see it more than they could have imagined. Morgana's breakdown and awakening Morgana had been sitting in her car in the church parking lot for 2 hours, working up the courage to go inside. After Sunday's debacle, she'd spent 3 days in her apartment, alternately crying and raging at how completely her plan had backfired. But something about Caspian's response to her attack had haunted her. His grace, his dignity, his refusal to fight back or retaliate. It was so different from the man she'd been married to that she began to wonder if she'd been wrong about everything. Forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me, he'd said. It's for my peace, my marriage, my future. The words had echoed in her mind for days. When was the last time she'd felt peace? When was the last time she'd looked toward the future with hope instead of bitterness? She'd driven to the church not to cause more trouble, but to try to understand what had changed Caspian so dramatically. She'd planned to slip into the back of whatever meeting was happening and observe, trying to figure out the secret to his transformation. Instead, she'd arrived just as people were leaving, their faces glowing with joy and excitement. Through the open doors, she'd heard fragments of conversation. So exciting about the baby. They're going to be wonderful parents. Due in May, perfect timing. Baby. Caspian and his new wife were having a baby. The news hit her like a physical blow. During their 3-year marriage, she'd brought up having children several times, and Caspian had always deflected the conversation. Maybe when the company is more established, he'd said. Maybe when we have more financial security. Maybe when I can take time off to be a real father. She'd interpreted his reluctance as just another way he was choosing work over their relationship. Now she realized it had been something deeper. He hadn't been ready to be a father because he hadn't known how to love properly. But he'd figured it out. He'd learned. And now he was building the family with another woman that he'd never been able to build with her. Sitting in her car, watching the church members congratulate Caspian and Serafina, seeing their obvious joy and the community's celebration of their happiness, Morgana felt something crack open inside her chest. It wasn't the sharp anger she'd carried for 5 years. It wasn't the bitter jealousy that had driven her to Sunday's confrontation. It was something softer and more painful, grief for the life she'd never had, and the dawning realization that her bitterness had poisoned any chance she might have had at finding her own happiness. "What am I doing here?" she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "What have I become?" She was 34 years old, alone, bitter, working a part-time job that barely paid her bills, and so consumed with resentment over a failed marriage that she'd forgotten how to dream about anything else. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Are you okay?" When was the last time she'd called her family? When was the last time she'd done something kind for another person? When was the last time she'd felt genuine joy instead of schadenfreude? She couldn't remember. As the church members continued to stream out of the building, still chattering excitedly about the baby news, Morgana made a decision that surprised her. Instead of driving away, she got out of her car and walked toward the church entrance. Pastor Shepard was just locking up when he saw her approaching. "Morgana, this is unexpected. Are you all right?" "No," she said simply. "I'm not all right. I haven't been all right for a very long time. Would you like to come inside and talk?" "I don't know. I don't even know why I'm here." Pastor Shepard unlocked the door and held it open for her. "Sometimes we don't know why we're somewhere until we get there. Come on in." They sat in the front pew where Caspian and Serafina usually sat, the irony not lost on either of them. "I heard about the baby," Morgana said after a long silence. "They looked so happy. They are happy. They've built something beautiful together. He never wanted children with me. Perhaps he wasn't ready then. Or perhaps I wasn't the right person to have children with." Pastor Shepard studied her face carefully. "What do you think made you the wrong person?" "I don't know. Everything. I was selfish, materialistic, focused on all the wrong things. I married him for money and status, and then I was angry when he couldn't love me the way I wanted to be loved." "But you wanted to be loved." "Of course I wanted to be loved. Doesn't everyone? What do you think love looks like?" Morgana was quiet for a long time, thinking about what she'd observed between Caspian and Serafina, the way they looked at each other, the way they moved together as a team, the way their community rallied around them. "I used to think love looked like expensive gifts and fancy vacations and social status. But watching them, love looks like partnership. Like putting someone else's happiness before your own. Like building something together instead of just taking from each other." "That's a wise observation." "Wise. Pastor, I spent 5 years hating my ex-husband for not loving me the way I wanted, but I never asked myself if I loved him the way he needed to be loved." "And how do you think he needed to be loved?" "I think he needed someone who saw his potential for goodness instead of just his potential for success. Someone who encouraged his spiritual growth instead of just his financial growth. Someone who wanted to build a life with him instead of just enjoying the life he could provide. Someone like Serafina." Exactly like Serafina. Tears started flowing again. "And I could have been that person if I'd been willing to grow and change instead of just demanding that he do it." "Morgana, can I ask you something?" "Sure. What do you want now?" "Not what you wanted 5 years ago, not what you wish you'd had. What do you want for your life going forward?" "I want to stop being angry. I want to stop waking up every day thinking about what I lost instead of what I could build. I want to become the kind of person who deserves love." "And what would that look like?" "I don't know. I've been bitter for so long. I've forgotten how to be anything else." Pastor Shepard reached for a Bible from the pew rack in front of them. "Can I share something with you?" From the book of Romans. Okay. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Transformation is possible, Morgana, but it starts with changing how we think about ourselves, about others, about what really matters. Do you think it's too late for me? To change, I mean. It's never too late. But change requires letting go of who you've been to become who you're meant to be. I don't know how to do that. You start by forgiving yourself. Then you forgive others. Then you begin making different choices. Forgive Caspian. Forgive Caspian for not being the husband you needed him to be. Forgive yourself for not being the wife he needed you to be. And forgive both of you for trying to build something real on a foundation of convenience and social expectations. Morgana sat in the quiet church, surrounded by the same love and peace that had transformed her ex-husband, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. Pastor, can I ask you something else? Of course. Sunday, when I attacked Caspian in front of everyone, he responded with such grace. How does someone learn to do that? Practice. Faith. And understanding that how we respond to attacks says more about our character than the attacks themselves. I want to learn that. I want to learn how to respond to hurt with grace instead of revenge. Then stay. Come to church. Join a Bible study group. Let this community help you heal the way they helped Caspian heal. After what I did Sunday, after how I embarrassed myself and tried to hurt him, especially after that, grace isn't for people who haven't made mistakes, Morgana. Grace is for people who have made mistakes and want to do better. The community response word of Morgana's conversation with Pastor Shepard spread through the church community with the speed that good news travels in close-knit groups. By Friday, most of the congregation knew that the woman who had tried to disrupt their worship was now seeking healing and had begun attending services. The response was mixed, but ultimately compassionate. Some members were skeptical, wondering if this was another attempt at manipulation. Others were curious about what had motivated her change of heart, but the majority, led by Caspian and Serafina themselves, chose to welcome her with the same grace they extended to all newcomers. How do you feel about her joining our church? Mrs. Patterson asked Serafina after Sunday's service. It must be strange, having your husband's ex-wife in the congregation. Honestly, I'm glad she's here, Serafina replied. If this church and this community can help heal the pain she's been carrying, then that's what we're supposed to do. You're very gracious. I'm very blessed. I have a husband who loves me, a baby on the way, and a community that supports us. I can afford to be gracious. And Caspian, how does he feel about it? He says that everyone deserves the chance to heal and grow. If God could transform him from who he was into who he is today, then God can do the same for anyone. Caspian's response to Morgana's presence had been characteristically graceful. He neither sought her out nor avoided her, but treated her with the same polite kindness he showed all church members. When she'd approached him after her third Sunday service to apologize for her behavior, he'd accepted her apology with dignity. Thank you for saying that, he'd told her. I hope you find the peace and healing you're looking for. I wanted you to know that I understand now why our marriage failed. It wasn't because you couldn't love, it was because neither of us knew how to love properly. We were both doing the best we could with who we were at the time. But you learned to do better. I hope I can learn that too. I believe you can. This community has a way of bringing out the best in people. Their conversation had been brief and respectful, witnessed by several church members who were impressed by the maturity both of them displayed. It was clear that whatever romantic feelings had once existed between them were long dead, replaced by something much healthier, mutual forgiveness and genuine hope for each other's future happiness. The real test of the community's acceptance came when Morgana began attending the same Bible study group where Caspian and Serafina had announced their pregnancy. Pastor Shepard had suggested she join the group as a way to build deeper connections within the church. Are you sure you're comfortable with this? Morgana had asked Serafina privately before the first meeting she attended. I know this is your group, your friends. I don't want to make things awkward. This isn't my group, Serafina had replied gently. It's God's group, and if God has brought you here for healing, then you belong here as much as anyone else. The first Bible study meeting with Morgana present was admittedly awkward. People weren't sure how to interact with her, given the dramatic nature of her introduction to their community. But as the weeks passed and she consistently showed up, participated thoughtfully in discussions, and began sharing her own struggles with vulnerability, the awkwardness faded. I spent 5 years thinking my ex-husband owed me happiness, she shared during a discussion about forgiveness. I never considered that maybe happiness was something I needed to create for myself. What changed your mind? Asked Rebecca Martinez, watching him handle my attack with such grace. Realizing that he'd become the kind of person who could inspire real love, while I'd become the kind of person who could only inspire pity or fear. But you're here now, said Marcus Chen. You're doing the work to become better. I'm trying. Some days are harder than others. That's normal, assured Mrs. Patterson. Growth isn't linear. We all have setbacks. The important thing is that you keep showing up, added Pastor Shepard. Transformation happens one choice at a time. The lasting impact as autumn turned to winter, the impact of that dramatic Sunday morning continued to ripple through multiple lives. Caspian's reputation in both the business and faith communities had been strengthened rather than damaged by how he'd handled the attack. Several business associates had commented on his composure under pressure, and new opportunities had emerged from unexpected places. The Morrison Group wants to discuss a partnership, his assistant Patricia informed him one Monday morning. They specifically mentioned being impressed by your character and leadership style. Character and leadership style? Apparently, word has gotten around about how you handled a difficult situation with grace and professionalism. People want to do business with someone they can trust to maintain dignity under pressure. Vail Industries was thriving, but more importantly, Caspian was thriving as a leader who prioritized values over profits. He'd turned down 2 potentially lucrative deals that would have required questionable business practices, choosing instead to focus on partnerships that aligned with his principles. I'd rather build something I can be proud of than something I have to apologize for, he told his board during a quarterly meeting. Our reputation for integrity is worth more than any single contract. Serafina's pregnancy was progressing beautifully. At 20 weeks, they'd learned they were having a daughter, and the nursery had become a labor of love for both of them. The community had rallied around them with gifts, advice, and offers of help that made them feel supported and cherished. Have you thought about names? Morgana had asked Serafina one Sunday after service. Their relationship had evolved into something surprisingly warm, not friendship, exactly, but mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. We're considering Grace, Serafina had replied. Given everything that's happened this year, it seems appropriate. Grace is a beautiful name, perfect for a daughter who'll be raised with such love. Thank you. And Morgana, how are you doing? Really? Better. Different. I'm learning that healing is a process, not an event. Are you dating anyone? Not yet. I'm focused on becoming the kind of person who could contribute to a healthy relationship instead of just taking from one. That's very wise. I learned it from watching you and Caspian. You two have shown me what real partnership looks like. Morgana's transformation had been gradual but genuine. She'd found a full-time job at a non-profit organization that provided art therapy for at-risk youth, work that felt meaningful in a way her previous life never had. She'd moved to a smaller apartment that she could afford without stress, decorated it with her own artwork instead of expensive purchases, and begun building a life based on purpose rather than status. I used to measure my worth by what I owned, she told the Bible study group one evening. Now I'm learning to measure it by what I give. She'd also begun the difficult work of rebuilding relationships with her family, reaching out to parents and siblings she'd neglected during her years of bitterness. The conversations were sometimes painful, but always healing. I'm proud of you, her mother had told her during a recent phone call. This sounds like the daughter I raised, not the angry stranger you became after your divorce. I'm still learning how to be her again. But I want to be someone you can be proud of. You already are. The birth and new beginnings Grace Evangeline Vale was born on a perfect May morning, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces of pure joy. Caspian had been a devoted partner throughout Serafina's labor, never leaving her side, whispering encouragement and prayers as their daughter made her entrance into the world. She's perfect, he'd whispered as he held his daughter for the first time, tears streaming down his face. Absolutely perfect. Look at her hands, Serafina had marveled. So tiny, so delicate. She's going to be strong like her mother, and gentle like her father. The church community had celebrated Grace's arrival with the enthusiasm of extended family. Meals appeared at their house for weeks. Offers of babysitting came from multiple sources, and gifts arrived that spoke of genuine love rather than obligation. "She's beautiful," Morgana had said when she visited to meet the baby. "She has your eyes, Serafina, and Caspian's determined chin. Would you like to hold her?" Serafina had offered. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Watching Morgana hold baby Grace with tears in her eyes, Caspian felt the full circle of healing that had taken place in all their lives. The woman who had once tried to destroy his reputation was now genuinely celebrating his family's joy. "Thank you," Morgana had whispered as she handed Grace back to her mother. "For letting me be part of this, for including me in your community, for showing me what grace really looks like. Thank you for choosing healing over bitterness," Caspian had replied. "For showing all of us that transformation is possible." 1 year later, Grace Community Church had never been more vibrant. The congregation had grown significantly over the past year, partly due to word spreading about the community's commitment to authentic love and grace under pressure. People were drawn to a church where real transformation was not just preached, but lived out in the relationships between members. The story of how you all handled conflict and chose grace over judgment has become legendary in pastoral circles, a visiting minister told Pastor Shepard. Churches all over the country are asking how to create this kind of authentic community. "It's not complicated," Pastor Shepard had replied. "Love people where they are, but love them too much to leave them there. Create space for both truth and grace. And trust that God can transform anyone who's willing to be transformed." Caspian and Serafina's marriage had deepened through the challenges of new parenthood, their love tested and strengthened by sleepless nights and shared responsibilities. Grace was a happy, healthy 1-year-old who was already showing signs of having inherited both her parents' strong will and their capacity for joy. "She's going to be trouble," Caspian observed as Grace pulled herself up to standing in her crib, determination written across her tiny features. "The best kind of trouble," Serafina agreed. "The kind that changes the world." Vale Industries had become known not just for innovation and profitability, but for ethical business practices and corporate responsibility. Caspian had implemented policies that prioritized employee well-being, environmental sustainability, and community investment. The company's reputation for integrity had actually increased their market value, proving that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. "You've created something special here," a business journalist had told him during a recent interview. "A company culture based on character rather than just profit." "Character is profitable in the long run," Caspian had replied. "People want to work with and for organizations they can trust." Morgana had flourished in her work with at-risk youth, discovering a talent for helping teenagers express their emotions through art. She'd been promoted to program director and had started dating a fellow counselor, a kind, patient man who appreciated her authenticity and her journey of growth. "I never thought I'd be grateful for rock bottom," she told Serafina during one of their occasional coffee dates. "But if I hadn't lost everything, I never would have found myself. Sometimes we have to lose who we were to become who we're meant to be." "Exactly. And Serafina? Thank you for being patient with me while I figured that out. Thank you for doing the work to figure it out. Grace is going to grow up in a world where she sees that people can change, that redemption is real, that love really does win. That's a beautiful legacy to leave a child." On the 1-year anniversary of Morgana's dramatic church appearance, Pastor Shepard had delivered a sermon on transformation, using their story as an example of how God could redeem even the most broken situations. "A year ago, this sanctuary witnessed what looked like an attack on one of our members," he'd said from the pulpit. "Instead, we witnessed the beginning of multiple miracles, the miracle of grace under pressure, the miracle of a community choosing love over judgment, and the miracle of a heart opening to healing." He'd looked out at the congregation, where Caspian and Serafina sat with baby Grace, surrounded by the same community that had supported them through crisis. A few rows back, Morgana sat with her new boyfriend, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. "This is what the kingdom of God looks like," Pastor Shepard had continued. "Not perfection, but transformation. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of grace in the midst of conflict. Not people who never fall down, but people who help each other get back up." After the service, as families gathered for the church's monthly potluck lunch. Caspian found himself standing in the fellowship hall, holding his daughter while watching his wife laugh with friends, observing his ex-wife help serve food to elderly church members, and marveling at the journey that had brought them all to this place. "Penny for your thoughts," Serafina said, appearing at his side with plates of food for both of them. Just thinking about how differently this story could have ended. How so? If I'd responded to Morgana's attack with anger instead of grace. If you hadn't chosen to welcome her into our community. If she hadn't been willing to face her own pain and choose healing. But that's not what happened. No, it's not. What happened was better than anything I could have planned or orchestrated. What happened was love winning. Not because it was easy, but because people chose to make it win. Grace babbled happily in her father's arms, reaching for the lights streaming through the stained glass windows, completely unaware that she was growing up in a community that had proven love really could conquer all, not through force or manipulation, but through the steady, patient choice to respond to darkness with light, to hatred with love, to brokenness with healing. Sometimes our greatest gifts come disguised as our greatest challenges. Caspian learned that true masculinity isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about character, integrity, and grace under pressure. Serafina discovered that standing by someone with dignity is more powerful than any defense. Their story teaches us that when we respond to hatred with love, to cruelty with kindness, we don't just win, we transform the very nature of the battle. What moment tested your character? How did you respond when someone tried to tear you down? If this story inspired you to choose grace over revenge, show it with a like, subscribe for more powerful stories about faith and character, and share this with someone who needs to remember that our response to adversity defines who we really are.